The gleaming halls of Space Station Nexus 7 buzzed with activity as Dr. Hannah Park made her way to courtroom 12. The human diplomat kept her shoulders straight, despite the curious stares from the various alien species that filled the corridors. Many of them whispered as she passed, some with curiosity, others with judgment already in their eyes. Hannah checked her communication device one last time. No messages from Earth. She was on her own here, nearly 20 light-years from home. Her simple black uniform with the Blue Earth Alliance insignia felt suddenly inadequate among the elaborate dress of the older Confederation species. The courtroom doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the chamber rose in concentric rings, around a central floor where defendants stood. Light filtered in through crystalline panels overhead, casting rainbow patterns across the polished stone floor. The room was already filled with observers, diplomatic aides, journalists from a dozen worlds, and curious onlookers. High Arbiter Taiho sat on an elevated platform at the front of the chamber. His tall form was covered in iridescent white scales that caught the light as he moved. His piercing blue eyes, implants Hannah guessed as Torians normally had simple black eyes, scanned the room with methodical precision until they landed on her. His lip curled slightly. "The human appears," said a clerk, a small purple being with 4 arms. Courtroom 12 now in session. Hannah stepped forward onto the central platform. A light from above illuminated her position. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes watching her. High Arbiter Taiho looked down from his seat with thinly veiled disdain. The Torian judge had earned a reputation across 3 sectors for his rigid application of Confederation law and particular strictness toward newer member species. Earth had only joined the Confederation 30 years ago, barely a moment in the timescale of galactic politics. "Dr. Park of Earth," his voice resonated through the chamber's perfect acoustics. It was deep and smooth, the universal translator giving it just the hint of an accent. "You stand accused of unauthorized access to restricted xenobiological archives. How do you plead?" Hannah opened her mouth to speak, but before she could fully respond, Arbiter Taiho waved his long, elegant fingers dismissively. "The evidence is clear," he continued, tapping a glowing screen before him. "Security logs show your credentials were used to access Level 7 archives containing sensitive information about Procyon developmental biology. Such access is limited to senior members of the Confederation." Hannah took a breath. "Your Honor, if I may explain—" "The time for explanations was during the investigation phase," Taiho interrupted. "This hearing is for sentencing only." Whispers rippled through the gallery. Even by Confederation standards, this was unusually swift justice. A few of the older species representatives nodded in approval, while the representatives from newer, member worlds looked uncomfortable. "The court imposes a fine of 50,000 credits, Taiho declared, to be paid before your departure from this station." The courtroom fell silent. Such a sum would bankrupt most humans, effectively ending their interstellar careers. Hannah felt her heart race but kept her face calm. A vegan diplomat leaned toward his aide and whispered something that made them both chuckle softly. In the back, a group of junior diplomats from Earth looked stricken. "Additionally," Taiho continued, seemingly pleased with the reaction his ruling had caused, "your access to all Confederation facilities above Level 3 will be revoked for a period of 1 standard year." Hannah stood perfectly still. The punishment was excessive by any standard. Without Level 4 access, she wouldn't even be able to attend most diplomatic functions, let alone continue her research. "Do you understand the ruling as it has been explained to you?" Taiho asked, his tone suggesting the question was merely a formality. The chamber was silent as everyone waited for the human to accept her punishment. Hannah looked around the room, noting the mix of pity and satisfaction on different faces. The court recorder, a small floating device, hovered near her head, waiting to log her response. Hannah straightened her shoulders and looked directly into Arbiter Taiho's eyes. Her next words would change everything. "With respect, Arbiter." Hannah's voice was calm but carried throughout the chamber. "I must inform the court that I am Dr. Hannah Park, Harvard University's chair of interspecies constitutional law. and appointed representative of the Human Alliance to the Confederation Charter Revision Committee. The room grew still. She produced her credentials with a practiced motion, sliding a small crystal into the podium before her. A holographic display appeared, showing her full diplomatic status and clearance levels. My access to those archives was explicitly authorized under Diplomatic Protocol 7B as part of our official research mission, she continued. The authorization was granted by Subcommittee Chair Dolan 3 standard months ago. Murmurs spread through the courtroom as data scrolled across the public viewing screens. The diplomatic AI chimed in with a soft bell tone, its neutral voice filling the chamber. Identity confirmed. Dr. Hannah Park, Earth designation. Current position, Chair of Interspecies Constitutional Law, Harvard University. Diplomatic status, Level 6 Alpha. Special clearance for Charter Revision Committee work granted on date 2187.243. Several elder aliens exchanged meaningful glances. A tall, blue-skinned Altarian in the gallery raised 4 of his 6 eyebrows. Near the front, a human embassy junior aide tried unsuccessfully to hide a smile. Arbiter Taiho's scales shifted color slightly, the Taurian equivalent of discomfort. The pearly white faded to a muted gray around his neck frills. He had just attempted to summarily fine one of Earth's foremost legal experts. I see, he said finally, his voice noticeably less confident. There seems to be a discrepancy in the records available to this court. No discrepancy, Arbiter, Hannah replied. Simply incomplete access on your part. The authorization exists in the diplomatic registry, not the judicial one. The systems are separate by design. A ripple of amusement moved through the more knowledgeable members of the audience. It was basic Confederation structure, something any arbiter should know. Taiho's assistant, a small reptilian being, frantically tapped at a control panel. New information appeared on the arbiter's private screen, causing his scales to shift, further toward gray. Furthermore, Hannah added, the archives I accessed contained developmental biology information about procyon species that is directly relevant to the proposed health regulations in Section 89 of the Charter revisions. My team is ensuring the new regulations respect all species' biological needs. The diplomatic AI chimed again, confirming access pattern matches stated research purpose. Taiho shifted uncomfortably on his elevated seat. The court recorder hovered, closer, documenting every word and scale color change for the official record. I have served as a consultant to 8 different species governments on constitutional matters, Hannah continued. My work on the Rigelian Treaty is taught at law schools across the Confederation. I would not jeopardize that reputation with unauthorized access. From the gallery, Ambassador Jin of Earth stepped forward. I can vouch for Dr. Park's character and credentials. She was personally selected for this mission due to her expertise and spotless record. The courtroom, moments ago silent with shock at the human's punishment, now buzzed with conversation. Reporters from several worlds were already sending updates through their neural links. The story was spreading rapidly. A Taurian judge had tried to bully a human diplomat, only to discover she was one of the most qualified legal minds in the sector. Arbiter Taiho's scales had now shifted to a definite blue-gray. Embarrassment mixed with irritation. He tapped his talons against his bench, clearly trying to decide how to proceed without losing more face. The court acknowledges the new information, he said finally. In light of this, the fine is rescinded and the hearing is adjourned pending further review of the access logs. That would be insufficient, Arbiter, Hannah replied calmly. The record must show that the access was not merely not unauthorized, but explicitly authorized. There is a significant difference in terms of my diplomatic standing. The Arbiter's eyes narrowed. Few defendants ever challenged him after a ruling was amended in their favor. But this human wasn't merely a defendant. She was a legal expert who understood exactly what was at stake. Very well, Taiho conceded. The record will show that Dr. Park's access was fully authorized under Diplomatic Protocol 7B. Hannah nodded once, her expression professional but her eyes conveying a clear message. She was not someone to be trifled with. As she stepped away from the podium, A senior Centaurian diplomat leaned toward his aide. "Fascinating," he whispered. "Perhaps these humans are more interesting than we thought." "Furthermore," Hana continued, her voice steady as she stood tall in the center of the courtroom, "I formally invoke the right of jurisprudential challenge under Article 4209 of the Confederation Charter." The murmurs became gasps. No one had invoked that ancient procedure in over 3 centuries. The spectators in the gallery leaned forward in their seats. A Vegan diplomat dropped his translation device with a clatter. "That article is rarely used," Arbiter Taiho said carefully, his scales shifting rapidly between colors. "Rarely used does not mean invalid," Hana replied. "The Charter preserves this right specifically for cases where systematic bias is suspected in the application of Confederation law." The courtroom recorder drone circled closer, its sensors fully focused on this historic moment. 2 security officers near the door exchanged confused glances, unsure if they should intervene. "I will represent myself against the Confederation's prosecutors in a full tribunal hearing," she announced, her voice growing stronger. "The charge is systematic prejudice against emerging member species." A collective intake of breath swept through the chamber. Several elder species representatives hurriedly consulted their data screens, checking the obscure article she had cited. Arbiter Taiho's scales now pulsed with a deep blue of surprise and concern. The color spread visibly across his face and neck, impossible for him to control. His assistant leaned up to whisper something in his ear, but he waved the aide away. "You understand what you are proposing?" Taiho finally asked, his voice lower than before. "A jurisprudential challenge requires the convening of the full 17, representatives from all founding species. It has not been done since the Arcturian dispute." "I am aware of the precedent," Hana answered, "and I am prepared." The crowd's whispers grew louder. In the back of the courtroom, a small group of human diplomats exchanged worried glances. This was not part of the mission plan. "Professor Jun Kim will serve as my second." Hana gestured to her colleague, a distinguished human legal scholar who had been quietly observing from the gallery. A slender man in his 60s stood up. His silver hair contrasted with his dark, blue diplomatic uniform. He bowed slightly to the court before making his way through the stunned spectators to join Hana on the floor. "Professor Kim is the author of Comparative Sentient Rights Across the Quadrant and visiting scholar at the Rigelian Institute," Hana explained. "He has my complete confidence in this matter." Kim nodded as he took his place beside her. His calm demeanor masked the significance of what was happening. No human had ever challenged the Confederation's legal system at such a fundamental level. Arbiter Taiho's assistant was now frantically consulting a very old-looking data scroll, searching for the proper protocol. The courtroom AI chimed in with a series of formal tones that hadn't been heard in centuries. "Challenge properly invoked," the AI announced. "Notification protocols initiated to the 17. Time allowance, standard cycle preparation. News of the challenge raced through subspace communications. Within minutes, diplomatic channels across 12 sectors lit up with urgent messages. A human was challenging the oldest legal system in the known galaxy. Taiho seemed to regain his composure slightly. "You understand the consequences if your challenge fails? The penalties can be severe." "I understand fully," Hana said. "But I also understand the consequences of allowing unchecked bias to corrupt a system that claims to represent justice for all species." In the observation gallery, Ambassador Jin of Earth pushed through to the front row. His face showed both pride and concern. "Dr. Park," he called out, "this action goes beyond your diplomatic mandate. The Alliance has not authorized—" "With respect, Ambassador," Hana interrupted, "my mandate is to ensure fair treatment under Confederation law. This challenge serves that purpose exactly." Professor Kim placed a steadying hand on Hana's shoulder. "The evidence is compelling," he added. "We have documented 342 cases of disproportionate sentencing against new member species in just the past standard year. A group of journalists from 7 worlds clustered near the exit, their recording devices capturing every word. A Centaurian reporter was already transmitting live to his homeworld. This day will be remembered, whispered an ancient Altarian, observer to no one in particular. The young ones are finally finding their voice. Arbiter Tejo tapped his gavel, sending a resonant tone through the chamber. This court is adjourned. The challenge has been registered and will proceed according to ancient protocol. His scales had settled into a mottled pattern of blue and gray, concern mixed with resignation. As Hana and Professor Kim turned to leave, the crowd parted before them. Some spectators bowed slightly in respect. Others looked on with worry or interest. A few of the elder species representatives glared with undisguised hostility. The challenge had begun. There would be no turning back now. The Grand Tribunal chamber hadn't been used in decades. Dust covers had been hastily removed from the ancient seats just days before. The ceiling soared nearly 30 meters high, with light filtering through. Crystal panels that shifted colors as the space station rotated. 17 judges from the oldest Confederation species presided, their massive forms dwarfing the two humans at the defense table. Hana looked around at the circular chamber. Hundreds of spectators filled the tiered seating. Some had traveled across multiple sectors to witness this historic event. The air smelled of cleaning agents mixed with the various atmospheric adjustments needed for the diverse beings present. "This tribunal is now in session," announced the chief arbiter, a massive draconian whose scales glittered with age marks indicating over 400 years of life. "The challenge of Earth Representative Park against Confederation judicial practices will proceed." Professor Kim leaned close to Hana. "They've brought Sola as prosecutor," he whispered. "Be prepared." Lead prosecutor. Sola floated toward the center of the chamber. The being was composed primarily of crystalline thought structures, contained within a shifting energy field. Sola had no fixed shape, appearing as a swirl of light and geometric patterns that changed with each argument point. The prosecutor's voice resonated directly into the translation fields around each attendee. "Honored arbiters of the 17, Sola began, the crystalline form pulsing with blue light. "This challenge is without merit and wastes the tribunal's valuable time. The human representative misunderstands our legal traditions, which have maintained peace across 12,000 worlds for 50 millennia." For 3 hours, Sola presented the Confederation's case with the confidence of a legal tradition spanning 50,000 years. The crystalline prosecutor displayed hundreds of precedents, each one appearing as a holographic document in the air, before dissolving into the next. The argument was simple. Newer species needed stricter oversight until they fully understood galactic norms. "It is not bias but proper guidance," Sola concluded, the crystal form now glowing a satisfied orange. "Just as we would not allow a child to operate dangerous machinery, we must guide newer species with firm boundaries." Several of the elder judges nodded in agreement. In the gallery, representatives from newer member worlds shifted uncomfortably at being compared to children. When Hana's turn came, she approached the central podium with measured steps. Her simple black uniform stood in stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial dress of the judges. She carried only a small data crystal, which she inserted into the ancient podium. "Honored members of the 17, she began, her voice clear and steady. "I come before you not to attack your traditions but to help them grow stronger." For 6 hours, she presented a masterful analysis that wove together legal traditions from 27 different species. The holographic displays shifted continuously as she moved through case after case, showing patterns invisible when viewed separately. "Consider these 3 cases," she said, displaying documents side by side. A vegan diplomat, a Centaurian trader, and a human scientist, all accused of the same information access violation. The vegan, from a founding species, received a warning. The Centaurian, from a Middle-Era member, received a small fine. The human received a fine that would bankrupt them and restriction of privileges for a year. She demonstrated statistically that newer member species received fines averaging 340% higher than established members for identical infractions. The data formed a striking visual pattern above the podium, a descending line correlating species membership duration with severity of punishment. "This is not guidance," she said firmly. "This is systematic exclusion." In the gallery, reporters frantically took notes. Several elder species representatives whispered urgently to their aides. A group of students from the Galactic Law Academy watched with rapt attention. Professor Kim rose from his seat and approached a secondary podium. His silver hair caught the light as he bowed to the judges before activating his own display. I have compiled documentation showing systematic patterns of judicial bias across 16 sectors, he explained, his voice gentle but firm. What is most concerning is not just the severity disparity, but the lack of proper appeals processes for newer members. The displays showed thousands of cases where appeals from newer species were dismissed without proper review. The pattern was undeniable. One of the judges, a floating collective of gas-based intelligences contained in an anti-gravity field, emitted a series of light pulses that indicated distress in their species. These patterns were unknown to us, the judge admitted, their voice coming through as a series of musical tones in the translation field. As Hana prepared her conclusion, she looked at the faces of the 17 judges. Some showed skepticism, others concern, and a few showed something she hadn't expected: shame. The law must evolve as we evolve together, Hana concluded, her voice soft but reaching every corner of the chamber. Or it serves not justice but merely power. The chamber fell silent as her words hung in the air. Even Prosecutor Sola's crystalline form had stopped its constant shifting, frozen in what appeared to be contemplation. The 17 judges of the Grand Tribunal filed back into the chamber. The room fell silent as they took their places in the towering seats. 3 days had passed since the conclusion of arguments. 3 days of deliberation that had the entire Confederation buzzing with speculation. Hana sat beside Professor Kim at the small defense table. Though her face remained calm, her fingers nervously tapped against her knee beneath the table. Kim placed his weathered hand over hers and nodded reassuringly. "Rise," instructed the chief arbiter, his ancient voice carrying easily through the vast space. Hana and Kim stood, as did Prosecutor Sola, whose crystalline form shimmered with a nervous energy that sent ripples of light across the chamber floor. "This tribunal has reached its decision," the chief arbiter announced. "After careful consideration of all evidence presented, our ruling is unanimous." A collective intake of breath swept through the gallery. Even the reporters, normally busy with their recording devices, stood frozen in anticipation. The challenge brought forth by Dr. Hana Park of Earth is valid and supported by evidence. The systematic bias in judicial proceedings against newer member species has been proven beyond reasonable doubt. Murmurs erupted throughout the chamber. The chief arbiter raised one massive clawed hand, and silence immediately returned. The tribunal's decision is unanimous in favor of Dr. Park. The gallery erupted in a mix of reactions, gasps, cheers, and some angry muttering from elder species representatives. Hana remained standing, her expression composed despite the historic victory. "All rulings affected by this systematic bias are to be reviewed," continued the chief arbiter, beginning with the original case against Dr. Park. At this, Arbiter Taiho was summoned to the center of the chamber. The Taurian judge who had started this entire process now stood before the assembly, his scales a humble gray color that indicated acceptance and submission. Gone was the arrogance that had characterized his initial ruling. "The ruling is rescinded," Taiho stated formally. "On behalf of the Confederation Judiciary, I extend our formal apology to Dr. Park and to humanity." The words echoed through the chamber. Never before had such an apology been issued to a newer species. In the gallery, the Earth ambassador looked stunned. Then came the unexpected. "I further request," Taiho continued, his voice growing stronger, "that Dr. Park and Professor Kim join the Judicial Reform Council to help us address these systematic issues." Hana's eyebrows rose slightly, the only outward sign of her surprise. The Judicial Reform Council was one of the most prestigious bodies in the Confederation, typically closed to all but the eldest member species. "We accept," she answered simply. The ceremony concluded with the formal sealing of the judgment. each of the 17 judges pressing their unique biological markers into an ancient recording crystal. The crystal glowed with completed patterns, signifying the binding nature of the decision across all Confederation space. As the crowd dispersed, reporters surrounded Hana and Kim, their questions coming in a jumble of languages that taxed even the advanced translation systems. Dr. Park, will this affect Earth's status in the Confederation? Professor Kim, is this the beginning of a new era of human influence? Will you push for reparations for past biased judgments? Ambassador Jin pushed through the crowd, his face a mixture of pride and concern. Dr. Park, you've achieved the impossible, but the political implications are exactly what we needed. Hana finished for him. This isn't about human advancement, Ambassador. It's about making the Confederation live up to its own ideals. 3 cycles later, the Park Principle became foundational in Confederation law, establishing that justice must be applied equally regardless of a species' tenure in the galactic community. The principle was taught in every legal academy across known space. Thousands of previous rulings were reviewed and revised. Newer species found their voices in Confederation councils. The balance of power, unchanged for millennia, began a subtle but meaningful shift. Change came slowly, but it came steadily. On the day marking the adoption of the new legal framework, a ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of Justice. Representatives from over 300 worlds attended, many traveling for weeks to witness the historic moment. After the formal proceedings, Arbiter Taiho, now her colleague on the Reform Council, approached Hana as she stood by a viewpoint, overlooking the spectacular rings of the gas giant below the station. 3 cycles ago, I would have had that view restricted to elder species representatives only, he said, his scales now a calm blue of wisdom and reflection. Hana smiled. And now? Now I understand that the view becomes more beautiful when shared, he replied. You have taught us that wisdom is not merely accumulated over time, he said quietly, but sometimes arrives with fresh eyes that see what ancient ones have overlooked. Hana looked out at the swirling colors of the gas giant's rings. This is just the beginning, she said. Justice is never finished, only improved upon. Behind them, Professor Kim watched with satisfaction as human and Taurian stood side by side, equals at last in the eyes of Confederation law.